Well, it's really a pleasure of mine to host Dr. Kashyap Patel, whom I met for the first time. Well, no, we've met actually a few times before, but I think we spent more time recently when we were both in Washington, D.C. A month or so ago. But I've invited Dr. Patel because I personally, Kashyap, was really fascinated by your journey as a healthcare physician and administrator, and I'm going to put you in the entrepreneurial category. We'll talk about that, and also how you got involved with COA. We're going to tell listeners about COA, what is COA, what they do, and so on. So, first of all, thanks so much for taking time of your schedule. I really genuinely appreciate that. I know how busy you are. So let's start by introducing you to listeners and viewers. Tell us a little bit about you.
Sure, Cherry. I'm really excited to be part of this conversation. I've heard your name, your reputation kind of precedes your name. I think I've heard your name in a very nice and very pristine way. So I always look forward to connecting in person. And of course,
These are lies. Don't listen to those.
Oh, no. And then I think it was great that we caught up about 3 weeks back in DC. But so I'm a practicing oncologist, but I'm a true nomad in this world. I've lived in 3 different continents, 11 different cities, and I've done 3 residencies, 100 hours each, and never got tired of doing it. So lived in Scotland, England, New York, Philly, Charlotte, everywhere. And then, of course, Mumbai and India. As a part of my journey, I've also been a journalist. I've been a photojournalist. I was a photographer. I did a lot of wildlife photography. And then I was lucky enough to see that wildlife didn't snake me into their fold. I don't and all along my life, I wanted to be an oncologist. It's a strange reason. When I was 9 years old, I saw a movie where the hero dies of lymphoma, and it kind of inspired me to be an oncologist, and I've followed that passion. So following that passion as a human being, I ended up in Charlotte area practicing here in a small community clinic just outside Charlotte, about 10 miles south of Charlotte in South Carolina. And it gave me a whole different perspective, having lived in like say 3 different continents, 11 different cities, met with different people. I realized that human beings are same everywhere, and I really enjoy every day of my practice here. So that's probably a story about me. I'm married, my beautiful wife, 35 years. She's like the rock solid bone behind me. I mean, I could have done nothing without her. She's like an angel. I have a wonderful son, 34-year-old. And we are lucky enough for him to even continue to live with us in a separate compartment in the house. So we're so blessed to have one family unit in America that kind of ties together like a gel.
That's amazing. So, Kashyap, and hopefully I'm saying your name properly. I'm not completely slaughtering it, right?
You can. No, absolutely. You got it very right.
So what, you did medical school in Mumbai?
Partly in Mumbai, partly in Ahmedabad. So I've lived in 2 different cities. And yeah, I did my oncology training in Mumbai, but I did my primary residency and med school in Ahmedabad, which is north of Mumbai, about 300 miles north of Mumbai.
And then you came to the US first, or you went to the Scotland?
I went to the UK first. I went to UK in 1992, and I spent almost 4 years in Manchester area, northwest part of England, in Blackpool. I was actually in Wigan, Manchester, and then I moved to Scotland as a faculty. I was a junior faculty at the Aberdeen University. And then, like most of the immigrants who travel outside their home country, they find America as about the most kind of welcoming country. And I was one of the same person. I felt this country had a lot more to offer to immigrants. So I landed in New York only to realize that I had to redo all my training. And I did again my residence for 2 more years. And went for a fellowship at Thomas Jefferson in Philadelphia.
So you had your residency done already in the UK, and
yes,
then you left the UK, came to the US, and did another residency.
This was my 3rd residency. I had 1 residency in India, 1 in UK, 1 in US. But I don't think I regretted that, because every system has a different kind of perspective of training and learning. So I really was not regretful. I think it was hard work originally, but I learned a lot of things in different residencies.
And what got you into oncology? Was it just because you saw that you said that movie, there was an actor or had lymphoma, you just was intrigued by the illness, or?
I was intrigued by, I was very sad that he died. And I was 9 years old back in 1969, 70. And my dad said, don't cry. When you grow up, why don't you become a doctor? And oncology was not even a field in India at the time. So I had no idea what I was talking about. But it just stayed with me. And then, my book, Between Life and Death, that I wrote about a year back, it has actually chapter on that book as on that episode that, when I was 9 years old, I saw this movie called Anand, and that guy was very famous actor, and I just it stuck to me, and I stayed with that passion.
We're going to get into your book a little bit. I'm very intrigued about and to know a little bit what got you to write it and what it is about.
Mhm.
So then you moved to the US, did your fellowship, and then where did you start practicing after fellowship?
So my first practice itself is the same that I'm with. I started practicing this outside Charlotte in South Carolina, and I joined this practice about 21 years back. And I joined the practice initially, and my senior founding partner felt that I had some business acumen as well as some vision to build up to a whole different levels. So from 2 doctors, we expanded the business to having 5 doctors and maybe 5 mid-levels. So now I think right now we are 9 providers in our clinic. And I expanded the practice. And then, like anybody else, I kept seeing the challenges that bothered me about the future of the oncology. So I started joining different organizations and continued to do advocacy work. And that's how I ended up in where I'm today. But I've been in the same location for 21 years now.
But your involvement in COA, and we'll talk about COA, was related to your observation of some of the challenges you were facing as a practicing oncologist. What are these challenges that led you to join COA? And as you describe this to us, how did you learn about COA and what is COA?
So that's very interesting topic. It probably I can spend hours and days on that. But to summarize, what I saw in 2004, 5, and 6, when I was just kind of fresh, a new kid in the block in the area, I could see that the health systems were expanding their footprints across the state lines, across all the provider landscape. So I remember one of the CEOs at the Tenet Hospital where the privileges once called me and told me that you better be ready to sell your practice to us, otherwise you'll be forced out of your practice. And I couldn't understand what he meant, but I then started realizing that the large corporations have billions of dollars, and in order to perpetuate and kind of expand their business plan, they would start buying small practices. And of course, we know the difference in the site of care costs. So what an insurance company pays us versus what they pay to the health system because of their capacity of negotiating contract. Obviously, we were almost like a threatened species. And then initially I became a member of our state oncology society, South Carolina State Oncology Society, and I became a board member and slowly started rising the cadre. So back in 2009 and 10, as I learned the business aspect of the oncology, I learned that it's important to be part of the fold. Otherwise, you probably could be vulnerable to be kind of a victim. So I started learning about that. And I'm also, like your channel, I'm an unfiltered. So I would be very outspoken critic of those capitalist interests. And at one of the meetings in Charlotte, when COA and I think ION were jointly hosting what they call community counts uh, lecture, I spoke about the challenges that we faced, and I said, we need to figure out way to survive. And that's when COA spotted me as one of the outspoken, unfiltered person who actually was patient's advocate in the first instance, was advocating for survival of independent practices, and also to ensure that the healthcare policy did not uh, compromise either patients' kind of access to care or the physicians access to running their own small businesses. So that's how I became part of the COA. And initially, they invited me to join the board, and then slowly and steadily, they said, you should look into taking leadership position. And with my, I would say, I had a business acumen. So when I started learning about the alternate payment model, I started working with my local peers. I actually was jointly involved in designing the Blue Cross Blue Shield South Carolina Oncology Care model along with the team at the BCBS. And so with all of these qualities and accomplishments, COA asked me to step up to the leadership plate so that we could create a combined vision between multiple stakeholders and ensure that patients' access to care remains as it is.
So COA stands for Community Oncology Alliance.
Yes.
History, I mean, when was it formed? What is it trying to accomplish? Like, what does COA want to see happen? And when was it established?
So COA was originally established almost 2 decades back, and for those who've got gray hair like me, and probably who have lost an affair and struggled to survive, it came into existence as an effort to get practices ready to work with the policymakers. In 2003, when Bush administration shifted the fee schedule as a part of the Medicare Modernization Act from the uh, wholesale acquisition cost basis to average sales price base, there was not a single representative from the oncology community within the policy space. So, of course, ASCO has a big footprint, but I don't think anybody took oncology seriously. And the only thing that was being shown was the oncologists with wealth and, trying to make money on the drugs. And of course, there has been kind of challenges with that as well. But in general, most of the oncologists, they want to serve patients. And I think having invested many years working 100 hours a week during residence fellowship, I think it may be appropriate for them to have appropriate fair market value compensation. So to have an appropriate voice within the local and federal government, Community Oncology Alliance came together between the physicians and founding executive director Ted Oken, Mary Krasinski, and so many other stakeholders decided to form a small coalition with an idea to let our frustrations, our concerns be known to the policymakers in the rightful way to ensure, number one, that patients' access to cancer care in regional centers was not compromised. Number two, our voice was heard in a policy space so that any unforeseen consequences could be brought to the knowledge of the policymakers. And the third is that the healthcare system does not become one having consolidation under the big giant umbrellas, where again it would lead to rising cost of care. It would restrict the access to care, and we are seeing it already now. Look at the cancer health disparities. I mean, I think there are two Americas. Somebody may have to travel like 2.5 miles one way to get access to trials. Why should we have that? So COA's purpose is to work with the policymakers and stakeholders to ensure that access to care is preserved, that physicians' voices are heard, and that policy, whether you look at the government policy, fee schedule, Medicare, or commercial interests, or even PBMs, they do not impinge on the rights of the physicians to practice medicine, and they don't come in between the patient and doctors.
So any community oncology practice could be part of COA.
Absolutely. Any community oncology practice could be part of COA. Anybody could be part of the COA.
Okay. And there's, I presume there's an actual fee that practices have to pay COA to be able to have the operations, or?
We do actually recommend, I think it's not a must, but we all voluntarily contribute because we have a staff that we have to support. So we recommend paying like I think about $2,000 per provider per year, but not everybody pays that, and it's okay. I mean, what we try to do is to encourage that this is almost like the the uh, the like-minded people coming together under one umbrella. So if somebody can become a member of the COA even without paying fees, but we do recommend that they should keep paying. We send them invoices if they can't pay for any reason, we don't throw them out.
And then the money that gets collected by COA from membership is used to try to influence, I guess, policymakers to protect or the community oncology and the way it serves patients. Is that a fair description?
Well, that's a fair description. I think we have, I think, full-time, 17 or 18 full-time staff members. We have some of the other expenses, traveling expenses. So we, for example, most of the board members spend their own money in spite of even paying the membership fees. When I go to DC, I spend my own flight money because I believe that I want to protect the association to ensure that we don't enter financial constraints. So the money goes essentially to help policymakers understand the impact of that. We have a separate PAC, which is a whole two separate kind of, so COA directly does not influence policymakers by giving them funding. I think there's a separate PAC which decides the political action committee and political funding. But as far as the day-to-day work is concerned, I go and talk to my congressman in DC to help them understand the policies changes and how it could impact access to care. So we try to use the local networking between the state and the federal legislators to hear our voice. And when multiple stakeholders from different states go to the respective congressmen and senators, we create that movement or fervor that any ill-thought policy could impact the cancer care delivery in the country.
So let's then just, I know you mentioned that before, but I want to try to structure it a little bit better for listeners. So can we talk about, in your opinion, the top 5 issues or problems maybe facing community oncology, and what is COA doing about these 5 problems? Maybe we'll start with problem 1. What do you think the biggest problem that is facing the community oncology practices in the United States of America today? Number 1.
Consolidation and vertical integration by the large health systems. So large health systems have billions of dollars, and then I've personally seen that a chairman of the program can walk into our doors and say, well, we have hundreds of millions of dollars and we can nuke small practices. They have the nerve to talk to the hospital board and say, if this practice does not join us, we can destroy them. That's the number 1 threat that we have.
So let's talk about that. Why would large corporate want to acquire small practices, and how can small practices say no if they are struggling to stay afloat? And are they struggling to stay afloat? Like, is a smaller practice, is it that the profit margin is narrower?
Correct. So you actually hit the nail on the right spot, Cherry. So what happens is the difference in the fee schedule between the large health system and a small practice gives them the monetary benefit. So for example, if my practice simply changes a tax ID of a large health system across a state line, the payer will end up in paying 3 to 4 times. What I don't understand in this country, Chadi, is that if you went to Walmart and today and bought something, and if the Walmart changes their name to Tiffany's tomorrow, the same thing should not cost 4 times. It's a commodity. So the problem in the health system right now that we are trying and struggling to face is, if we are a less expensive site of care, why should the policy allow these sort of consolidation. Fortunately, in our area, Department of Justice and FTC looked into the practices by this big health system, and they filed an antitrust lawsuit against them to about the policy. What they also do, they will actually buy all the surgeons, they will buy all the primary care. So even if I refuse to sell, then I'll be forced not to have patients because they probably will control the patient flow. And that is exactly how the DOJ and FTC looked into the practice of referring patients within the internal network, narrow networks.
But maybe like if you have a large corporate that's buying a small practice, maybe this helps the practice get more resources. So as a small practice, you may not have access to, I don't know, a PET scanner or CAT scans or radiation oncology or dispensing pharmacy. And by having these additional consolidation, it may allow you to have more resources to serve patients. Is that a reasonable counter argument?
That's not at all, because we have our own CAT scan machine. We have access to CAT
Yeah,
scan.
I mean, maybe not. I mean, I guess I'm trying to think, is there a benefit for a small practice to be part of a larger practice if you're getting more resources? Maybe you get drugs cheaper. I don't know. I'm trying to think of what's the benefit.
Yeah, that's a good argument, but I think at the end of the day, when you look at who ends up in paying, consumer. So about 20% patients in our area do not have Medigap insurance. So if my practice was absorbed by a large health system, the out-of-pocket cost will rise 3 times. And some of my patients who barely make $1,200 a month, who don't have Medigap insurance, they let that care go away. So we've seen that with escalation of the out-of-pocket cost, patients tend to drop their care. So I would rather be happy making less money than to be controlled by a health system which increases cost. And which, that's what one of the reasons for disparities is access to care with financial toxicities. And I would rather see that patients leave than to become the victim of the consolidation.
So the that's number one problem. This, I think you outlined, it's really the acquisition. Acquisition. Number two?
PBMs. So with the shift into the oncolytics, into oral space, most of the practices have started dispensing drugs because it's easier. You can counsel patient, you can start with a split fill. The PBMs come in between the physician and a patient, and frequently it takes about 3 to 4 weeks before patients can have their hands on the medicines. So the policies that PBMs have in place, particularly, without manufacturing drugs, simply by their business entity, if they can make profit between 20 to 47%, which is what the studies have shown, patients end up in paying. The second thing is patients do not have access to multiple foundations. So if I hand over a prescription to an expensive oral oncolytic drug, if their out-of-pocket cost is $2,000, they'll let that go. They say, I don't want to take the medicine. I can't afford it. As against that, I have 3 full-time employees. So I just got my numbers today from my business office. We raised about $1.9 million of direct and indirect assistance to make sure that patients' access to drug was maintained. I don't think anybody in that large behemoth system would be keen to do that. That's not their business strategy. So the PBMs and the access to appropriate oral oncolytic is another problem that we face virtually every other day.
So let's talk, before we go to problem 3, what did COA do or try to do about the first problem, which is the acquisition and consolidation, and about a second problem? I realize sometimes there may not be immediate solutions and it's just work in progress, but I'm just curious, I guess, into how an organization like COA tackles these problems, and what did COA try to do or has been able to do?
So COA works with the policymakers to find a solution to provide better access to care. And coming back to your first point is that I don't do bone marrow transplant. I don't treat acute leukemic. So I always look forward to those big systems that have multiple resources. So I do like their existence to ensure the things I can do, I want them to do. But as far as the practice survival is concerned, COA has been working with the CMMI to facilitate development of the alternate payment model where the physicians are encouraged to ensure the sustenance of the quality of care but saving the money. So for example, one of the things that we work with CMMI is to reduce the hospitalization, reduce the total cost of care while maintaining the same outcome. And the first version was the oncology care model. The second version will come down the road. So we are actually working with stakeholders to help facilitate development of the advanced alternate payment model. So that is one thing we are doing. We are also triggering studies to look at difference in the site of care analysis. And this data would help us to go back to the payer for asking for a better contract so that we can have a sustenance that's easier. So the third thing is on a regular basis, we go to our lawmakers to help them understand again why it is important to maintain independent practices. Back in 2004 and 5, 85% of the care was delivered by independent practices. Come 2021, it's less than 55%. So there's been 30% practice either have vanished, which has led to difficulty in access to care. There are parts in our state where there's no oncologist. Somebody would have to travel about 60, 70, 80 miles one way. When you look into Montana, Iowa, there are no small practices. It's all because they were either absorbed or they become extinct because of the survival struggle.
That is actually a pretty staggering statistic, from 85% to 55%.
Yes, sir.
So I guess, Kashyap, when a practice is acquired, it can still be in this. It stays in the same location it was serving. It just have a different governance structure from the hospital or the acquirer.
Right. And so what ends up in happening is, most of the people who are senior, they end up in leaving because, you worked under one structure. And then when somebody comes and says you can't do it, you have to see like patients every 10 minutes because they crunch the numbers. I mean, they don't worry about the relationship between physician and a patient. So for example, there's a town called Gastonia, which is just about 15 miles north of where we are. And the practice was acquired by a large health system, and every senior physician left within a year.
And it's mainly because the I guess the larger healthcare system is
dictatorial,
right? And it's more interested in the numbers. So
there's no soul to that. They worry more about crunching the numbers that you have to see so many patients, and then after 2-3 years when the contract comes up for renewal, I've talked to so many of my colleagues. They regret, but I mean, sometimes they don't have a choice because they bought a house there, they have a family there, they are in no compete clause.
So then what? I mean, nobody is forcing practices to sell. They must be selling because they are either seeing it as a lucrative opportunity in the initial contract, although they obviously you can never guarantee the renewal of the contract, or because they're really stressed. Like, you will never sell your practice unless you're really stressed financially and you have no way out. You just have to be bought out, or you're going to go under, financially.
So I think the problem why they end up in selling is if you're somewhat slightly gullible and weaker, and if your reference base has been taken away, so they are forced to sell. They are not actually willing to sell. I don't recall a single colleague of mine who sold practice because they saw better money on the other side or better quality of life. They were forced.
Mm-hmm.
And this is this reason why the DOJ filed an antitrust lawsuit against the large health system, because they felt that the policies implemented by the large health systems were not in compliance with FTC, and they saw that as a violation of antitrust lawsuit. So obviously, it's not that they want to sell; it's because either they can't survive because of their referral base is taken away.
So what happened with that now, the FTC lawsuit?
Well, the system has been warned not to do anything further, so I think they've been on a kind of hold.
Okay. So your position at COA now, you're the president or you're like on the board, or what's your actual title at COA?
I'm the president. I'm
So
a
I'm talking to
re-elected
the
as the
president.
second
I'm talking to the president himself, right?
I'm the president. Yes, I'm the president of the COA right now.
And how long is that term?
It's actually 2-year term, so this is my second year.
Okay. So as the president, do you come in and you have like a particular strategy or a particular agenda that you would like to accomplish during your 2-year term as a president?
Absolutely. And I think our interests are very well aligned here because number one priority I have is to look at the cancer health disparities. And then we got to know about the depth and the breadth of that last year when the AACR report came out, which is quite damning for the health system. And the second priority is to promote the advanced alternate payment model, get a better relationship with CMS, CMMI, to help them understand the value of community oncology, the difference in the site of care cost analysis, and how the access to care is maintained because of the community oncology practices presence in the small to medium-sized communities across the country. And so my two priorities top is maintain the access to care for all, irrespective of who they are, what they look like, how much they make, or how they speak, the literacy level. And second is make the health system affordable and cost effective.
And so Kashyap, is this do you put your practice on hold? It seems like that's a lot of work. So you cut your practice hours and you're doing this, or you?
I've done that. So I've actually cut my practice hours to now just 2.5 days a week. And before COVID hit, even as a vice president of the COA, I used to fly to DC virtually every other week, if not every week sometimes. And that's simply because we get together, we have an office in DC, and our theme is that the more visible we are within the powers to be, the more kind of knowledge base that we bring to the lawmakers about the implications of ill-thought policies, the higher is the chance that we can continue to provide the care in unfettered way.
So if you go back to 5 years, over the past 5 years, I would like to highlight to listeners maybe some of the accomplishments that COA have been able to achieve and land over the past 5 years. Like if you want to tell somebody who has never heard of COA, what would you say the top few accomplishments over the past 5 years?
So number one accomplishment that we did was to support and promote the advanced alternate payment model, which is the oncology care model, to work with the federal government, CMS, CMMI, and that's one thing that we've achieved. Number two, what we've achieved is reduce the risk of consolidation. So there's a program called 340B. So 340B program allowed the large not-for-profit institutions to get drugs at a substantially low price and get paid at par with the practices. That was a big incentive for them to buy the practices so that it would end up increasing the profit line. And we work with CMS to understand the consequences of the 340B. So CMS cut down the reimbursement to the point where now there's not a lot of meat left, for lack of better words, for the 340B institutions to keep buying practices. Of course, they still do it on the commercial side. So that's one. Second thing we've achieved. Third is, making the lawmakers aware about the issues with the PBM. So we are trying to promote the transparency bill. There's one bill that actually bipartisan pending in the Congress right now. Terry Sewell, Congressman Terry Sewell and Bill Rackus, they're trying to pass Timely Access to Cancer Treatment Act of 2021, where if a PBM cannot provide treatment within 72 hours, it could be dispensed by the practices. So we've had our hand in multiple legislations that actually, reduces the impediment to the access to the care.
So did you tell us about was the book that you wrote related to COA and to what you're trying to do? Or is it completely different?
The book is completely different. So I have a different perspective on the life and death. And what I saw when I came here to practice oncology is that neither me nor my patients have a very clear understanding about process of death and dying. And it always was a challenge to talk about death and dying. So I started maintaining the decent records of my conversations with patients, and I started learning about perception of death between different faiths. And I actually tried to attend most of my patients when they were physically leaving this world. So I would be there when they're dying, actually. And it gave me different perspective. But then I saw that if I could share that perspective of the transition between the physical body and wherever we are heading afterwards, it may help some of other people, the audience, who want to read about it. So I created a narrative nonfiction account of my patients in a conversational form with another patient who actually passed away, almost like Tuesdays with Maury, where my conversation with my patient would enable others to understand the journey between life and death, and then what happens and how we can make death not as a gloomy event, but how we could make it more as a celebratory event where we would prepare departure. We do what we call the baby showers before somebody is born. We don't know where they're coming from. So why can't we celebrate the departure where we know that we're heading somewhere else that we don't know?
Wow, that's pretty deep. uh, I don't know how you could celebrate death, but that's interesting. You got me intrigued about the book. I will be interesting to see what others say. I think it's a cultural thing. I think maybe some cultures
Absolutely.
celebrate, but I think it's difficult to, I believe, for most people, losing someone, a loved one, close to the person, and realizing you're never going to see them again is difficult to be a celebratory event.
So I would call it celebration of their life, not the celebration of death.
Yes.
So yeah. One thing is certain, that both of us will be dead. It's not when. It's not if, it's when. So do I worry about when it's going to come, or do I celebrate every moment I have, so that when that moment comes, there's no regret that I did not live my life to the fullest.
Yeah, that is very, very intriguing and interesting. So anything else we should talk about COA and what you're doing with COA that will be of interest to listeners, you think?
COA has been right now very deeply entrenched into looking at the cancer health disparities. After the ACI report that came out, where we show that 34% of the deaths are preventable, 1 in 3 deaths is preventable from cancer. And we spent almost about $230 billion more between 2003 and 2006 because of disparities. So COA's topmost priority is how to actually translate the debate into action. So there's a lot of debates going on about disparities, what causes it. But COA is one body that is physically putting measures in place to the practices by different concepts. And we'll have some probably posters or even papers coming out in next 6 months to a year as to what are the operational successes that COA has achieved in partnership with member practices to address disparities, if not all, some of them. So COA is a body that actually believes more in operations and actions, less talk, more actions.
Well, I would really look forward to reading these papers, Kashyap. I think this is really interesting. It's a well-intended goal and mission. It's pretty tough to accomplish. There are so many variabilities involved, but I think, focusing on a couple of tangible measures that you could actually accomplish would be a key for success.
Absolutely. And I think coming back to last topic of precision medicine, because I can't not talk about that. I think what I feel, if we had a future projections, I think what COA is trying to do is to again create some sort of precision medicine specific initiatives where we know that the biomarker testing rate is way too low, probably between 25 to 40%, depending on what region you take. So we're trying to bring initiatives between education, resources to increase the appropriate NGS testing, somatic mutation, genomic profiling, whatever technique that you want to use, so that every patient has access to appropriate testing, targeted therapies if they kind of meet criteria, and a better outcome. So end of the day, COA's effort has been to bring in the technology of tomorrow to patients now and do everything possible to break the bureaucratic or dictatorial hurdles that comes in between patients and doctors.
Hey, well, really good luck. I mean, I think that this would be great. I look forward to learning more about your accomplishments in the year to come, and then after that, you stay involved in COA, but not in the capacity as president, correct?
I have to be on board for 2 more years as ex-president, as a kind of immediate past president, and then there are other avenues. I think I'm looking into starting something called National Coalition on Cancer Disparities, a body that's above and beyond all of us, because again, the movement has to continue on disparities. It could be past our lifetime as well. So whatever I want to do, I want to make it more like a sustainable legacy rather than something that's kind of transactional.
Yeah. I really appreciate your time, Kashyap. This was great. I hope listeners understood a little bit more about you, the person, and also about COA and what COA is doing with trying to accomplish. I presume they can check it out on the COA website, and there's probably a lot of information there to look at.
Absolutely. And maybe in future we'll talk about disparities. I think that's another big topic. I really want to be unfiltered, uncensored there.
Hey, anytime. You could I think it's a very difficult topic because there's so many elements that involved to be able to resolve the issue. Like we know disparities exist in the US and outside the US, right? There are disparities between people who are in Chicago and people who are in Nigeria in terms of, so I think it becomes, how to mitigate that. It's going to be a very slow progress, but there are lots of opportunities that we can work together to make it better.
I think we'll work together on that, Chad.
All right, my friend. Thank you so much.